FM News Talk 97.1. On demand audio.
Roger Stone, it's an honor to have you on the show. Sure, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be here.
Yes, sir. You know, I'm looking back, and before we get to the making of the president in 2016, how Donald Trump orchestrated a revolution. As I recall, your involvement and then ultimately your exit from the campaign was, in my opinion, the first example of true fake news, where they basically, the news media essentially lied about the reasons why you left the campaign or reasons why there was some kind of split or whatever. And it was all based on just a make-em-up, correct?
Yes, absolutely true. I was not fired from the campaign. I resigned from the campaign. I resigned from the campaign because I concluded I could be of greater assistance in the election of Donald Trump from the outside as opposed to from the inside. And, of course, I subsequently published my book, Clinton's War on Women, which was the definitive handbook that you needed to defeat Hillary Clinton because it laid out her true record on everything. So I think you're exactly right. If you go back and look at it, from the moment I left the formal campaign, I did really hundreds of media appearances and surrogate speeches for Donald Trump. I never, for a second, stopped being a supporter.
Yeah, well, I noticed that because what happened is I'm hearing initially the news report saying Roger Stone just couldn't tolerate being part of Donald Trump's world anymore and just had to leave and blah, blah, blah. Next thing I know, I hear you time after time again supporting President Trump. So, yeah, I would definitely chalk that up as one of the original fake news stories of 2016. So how about this book, Making of the President 2016, How Donald Trump Orchestrated a Revolution? So, well, I'm sure you had to write a book about it, but in a nutshell, how did he?
Well, two things. First of all, I think that technological advances are what give rise to the alternative media. The fact that more people are now getting their news from their handheld computer device than a television set means that if you wanted to watch CBS on television on your handheld device, you'd have to go through the Internet. And when you get to the Internet, you quickly realize that there's any number of better news outlets that are more accurate and doing more objective reporting. And that has led to a revolution. A majority of Americans no longer get their news from mainstream media, but more importantly, the mainstream media's hammerlock, their monopoly on the dissemination of political information, has finally been broken. This is the most significant development in American political history because it means that we have taken control away from the handful of a small number.
You know, and it seemed pretty easy for someone like President Trump and at that point candidate Trump to be able to point out that both parties had basically taken their respective voters for granted. And even though obviously Donald Trump worked very hard to get that message across, it seemingly was very easy once the public figured that out.
I think that's exactly true, and the election was historic from that point of view.
One of the things you point out in your book is those last days of the campaign, and I know one of the reasons why you had such deep respect for President Trump is because you knew him also as a businessman, and let's face it, Donald Trump could not have achieved the success he achieved as a businessman by being lazy. And those final days of the campaign basically proved what a lot of people like you knew already, and that is that this guy, when he gets onto something, he works his tail off to achieve it.
Yeah, he's a very, very stubborn guy, and I say that in a positive sense. When he sets his mind to a goal, he's not going to be dissuaded. He has decided to seal our borders and to fix our immigration system. He's going to do it, I have no doubt, and he is prepared to take on those who are opposed. This is a refreshing thing in Washington. We've never seen this before. Oh, my God, a person who actually says he's going to do things in the election, but then actually does them. It's almost unheard of.
Interesting. You were also your history, and you talk a lot about the historical implications and go back in time and look at some similar cases. And of course, the Truman Dewey example is one. But you actually worked and had the privilege of working for Richard Nixon, and you say in the book that Richard Nixon actually saw the possibility of a Trump presidency down the line. How was that?
He's the first person who ever mentioned it to me. Evidently, he was invited to George Steinbrenner's box at Yankee Stadium for a game, and Donald Trump was also a guest that day, so they met, and they really hit it off. And the next morning, President Nixon called me and he said, well, I met your man. Boy, he's really got it. He sees the big picture. If this guy ever got in politics, he could go all the way. And I said, all the way? And he said, yes, all the way. That means the White House. And, of course, several days later, he sent Trump a note telling Donald Trump that Mrs. Nixon had seen Trump on the Mike Douglas show and that she was very impressed and that she said if he ever got into politics, he could go all the way.
Wow.
Well, this is typical Nixon circumlocation. It was Nixon who saw him on Mike Douglas, and he was using Mrs. Nixon, in this case, as a rhetorical device.
Wow. All right. I don't want you to give everything away in the book, but one more thing that I find fascinating, and that is the exploration of the white female vote that helped Donald Trump into the White House. And even though the conventional wisdom was that women hate Donald Trump and would hate Donald Trump, and in fact, this must be the most befuddling thing in the aftermath of the election to the Democrats, is the number of women who came out for President Trump.
Yeah, I think a lot of this had to do with Hillary Clinton's role in suppressing and bullying and intimidating the various women who were victims of her husband. I understand the mainstream media likes to call this infidelity or indiscretion. No, it's sexual assault. It's violence against women. Bill forced himself on women who had no interest, and the media suppressed this very effectively in the 80s because we had no alternative media, and the Clinton people were able to mow the major networks except for NBC, who ultimately ran the Juanita Broadwick interview. But ultimately, I think enough women figured out that Hillary was no advocate for women. In fact, she had been an abuser of women. And I think that explains Trump's doing much better than expected among white women voters.
The book is called The Making of the President, How Donald Trump Orchestrated a Revolution. And folks, this is written by a guy who has been involved in 10 Republican presidential campaigns and an advisor to them and ultimately to the presidents. And the detail in this book is just amazing, outstanding, riveting. Roger Stone, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Best of luck with the book. But also thank you on behalf of all of us conservatives out there for all the hard work you've done and all the work you did actually to expose some of the great things that Donald Trump stood for throughout the campaign. So thank you so much for joining us.
Many, many thanks. We're very, very close to the New York Times bestseller list, so I urge your listeners to grab the book. I would be very grateful.
Oh, yes, sir. We'll help too, and we'll be there for you, Roger Stone. Thank you so much.
Many thanks.